It started like any other evening in Hollywood. The air was electric, thick with perfume, champagne, and the faint tang of ambition. Guests arrived in sleek black limousines, their heels clicking on the red carpet, cameras flashing like lightning in a storm that refused to pass. Inside, the atmosphere was a cocktail of glamour and tension, a room where fortunes were flaunted and whispers carried heavier than gold. And at the very center of the storm, unknown to many, were Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. The royal couple, icons of media fascination, expected a warm welcome, or at least a polite acknowledgement, from Hollywood's elite. But what they encountered would defy every expectation, shatter a carefully constructed narrative, and send shockwaves through the party that everyone thought would be a celebration. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to walk into a room and realize that the entire world, not just a literal crowd, but a metaphorical one, the media, the cameras, the whispers, and the judgment of history, is watching your every move? Harry and Meghan were about to find out. They were not merely attending Kris Jenner's 70th birthday party. They were stepping into a minefield of celebrity power dynamics, old grudges, and social hierarchies more complex than any royal protocol. The stakes were sky high. This was Hollywood at its most unforgiving. Glitz, glamour, and gossip all colliding under a chandeliered ceiling. The tension began before they even reached the front doors. Paparazzi had been lying in wait for hours, lenses trained on every limousine that approached the Jenner estate. Flashes went off as their sleek black vehicle slowed, capturing every polished detail. The perfect smiles, the understated elegance of Meghan's dress, the sharp, tailored lines of Harry's suit. But while the photographs portrayed composure, a quiet dignity, the energy on the red carpet told a different story. Subtle glances from arriving celebrities, hushed whispers, and the occasional smirk hinted at something else entirely. There was an undercurrent of anticipation, almost as if the room collectively sensed that the evening would not unfold as planned. Kris Jenner's birthday party was already being described as the social event of the year. A roll call of Hollywood A-listers, musicians, actors, producers, and influencers had RSVP'd, each one a brand in themselves. The guest list read like a who's who of the entertainment industry, and yet, despite the glitz, a peculiar tension lingered, one that only escalated as Harry and Meghan approached. Some guests, perhaps out of genuine curiosity, others out of lingering resentment or competitive edge, whispered speculations about the royals. Would they charm everyone with their Hollywood-honed poise, or would they stumble under the glare of celebrity scrutiny? From the moment they arrived, it was clear that the evening would be anything but ordinary. Their presence alone was enough to shift the atmosphere. Conversation faltered when they entered a room filled with people accustomed to commanding attention. Eyes darted, phones subtly angled for photos, and whispers began to ripple like the first shivers before a storm. Meghan's eyes scanned the room with a mix of grace and caution. Harry, ever the protective husband, maintained a composed exterior, though his jaw tightened slightly, a micro-expression many would later analyze in endless commentary. The couple walked the thin line between protocol and performance, aware that Hollywood, unlike royal engagements, offered no script, no carefully timed photographers, and no buffer between perception and judgment. The party itself was an opulent display of wealth and taste. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed panoramic views of Los Angeles, bathed in the soft golden hue of sunset. Guests sipped champagne served in crystal flutes, laughter echoing above the subtle hum of a string quartet playing in the background. Tables gleamed with curated floral arrangements, candles flickering like tiny sentinels keeping watch over the unfolding drama. Every detail, from the designer gowns to the meticulously plated hors d'oeuvres, screamed exclusivity and perfection. And yet, the very perfection of the environment only magnified the tension, creating the perfect stage for an unexpected confrontation. Did they sense it yet? The subtle shift in energy, the almost imperceptible tightening of jaws, the sideways glances exchanged across the room, the tiny, calculated pauses in conversation that spoke volumes? Something was about to happen, a rupture that no one anticipated, and certainly not the Sussexes. What makes this story compelling? and why it matters now, is the collision of worlds. The royal family, steeped in centuries of protocol and tradition, meets Hollywood, a realm ruled by image, influence, and instantaneous judgment. It's a collision that exposes vulnerabilities, ambitions, and insecurities on all sides. Harry and Meghan, already under the relentless scrutiny of tabloids, social media, and global public opinion, found themselves in a room where every misstep could, and would, be amplified. The stakes were as much about reputation as they were about pride, influence, and legacy. Every step they took, every smile they offered, every word they spoke could become a viral sensation, fodder for memes, or a headline that dominated news cycles for days. And then it happened. A subtle tension became palpable. A hush swept across one side of the room, barely noticeable to most, yet catastrophic in its implications. One particular A-lister, known for their unapologetic confidence and sharp tongue, turned to the couple with a gaze that could cut through steel. Meghan's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Harry's hand tightened slightly on hers, a protective reflex signaling the storm they had walked into. That gaze, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, would later become the first domino in a chain reaction that no one present would forget. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, curiosity turning into anticipation, anticipation into spectacle. The night had transformed from celebration to confrontation, and the royals were at the epicenter of it. But the story doesn't just unfold in the obvious moments. It's in the subtleties, the exchanged glances between guests, the sudden laughter that didn't reach their eyes, the carefully timed comments that seemed casual but carried the weight of calculated scrutiny. The room had become an arena, and the Sussexes, despite their experience under public scrutiny, were momentarily exposed, vulnerable to an audience that held neither reverence nor restraint. By now, you may be wondering, who was this A-lister? What could they possibly have done that would challenge the poise and experience of a royal couple accustomed to global attention? And more importantly, how did the event spiral from casual whispers to loud boos, mocking laughter, and viral chaos that would dominate headlines and social media feeds? These are questions that many have speculated about, but few have witnessed firsthand. Tonight, we will unravel every layer of this story, the intricate power plays, the emotional reactions, the surprising facts, and the shocking moments that unfolded behind the glimmering facade of Kris Jenner's birthday celebration. Every Hollywood event has its moments, but few have the capacity to become cultural flashpoints. This was one such moment, a collision of celebrity, royalty, and raw human emotion that would leave no participant unchanged. From whispered criticisms to loud jeers, from subtle smirks to overt mockery, the tension escalated with a pace that no one anticipated. Meghan's eyes flicked across the room repeatedly, catching snippets of conversation, fragments of expressions, micro-reactions that hinted at brewing conflicts. Harry's protective instincts were in overdrive, his attempts to maintain composure tested with every passing minute. The scene was electric, charged with anticipation, and charged with the unspoken question, who would break first? And yet, the stakes went beyond mere embarrassment or gossip. In Hollywood, perception is everything. Influence is currency. One misstep, one audible reaction, one perceived slight can ripple through networks of power, altering relationships, deals, and alliances. For Harry and Meghan, who had recently navigated the complex terrains of royal protocol, media scrutiny, and contractual obligations in entertainment, the stakes were more than social. They were existential. Every word, every glance, every reaction was loaded with significance. As the night progressed, the tension became almost tangible, like static electricity crackling in the air before a storm. And it wasn't just about the royals anymore. The crowd was engaged, complicit in the drama. Eyes widened, whispers intensified, phones discreetly captured every moment. By the time they reached the center of the room, the atmosphere had transformed from one of celebration to something far more volatile. And it was then that the first audible expression of disdain, a subtle but unmistakable sound, swept across the party like wildfire. The moment would not only be captured on camera, but would echo across media outlets, social media, and water-cooler conversations around the globe. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the air shift around you? Not because of the crowd, the lights, or even the music, but because every single person was aware of you in a way that made your heartbeat stutter? That's exactly what happened the moment Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped from their limousine and onto the red carpet at Kris Jenner's 70th birthday party. The night was supposed to be glittering. It was Hollywood, after all, where fantasy meets reality in a perfect, curated spectacle. Limousines glided along the circular driveway, engines humming softly, cameras clicking like an endless percussion line. Inside those sleek black vehicles were two people who had already endured decades of public scrutiny, whose lives had been dissected by tabloids, podcasts, and social media trolls. And yet, nothing could have prepared them for what awaited in that mansion's driveway, under the glowing chandeliers of paparazzi flashes and the curious, sometimes hostile eyes of Hollywood's elite. The Sussexes had chosen their outfits carefully. Meghan wore a muted, elegant gown, the kind of understated sophistication that was meant to speak volumes without shouting. Harry's tailored suit was impeccable, cut with precision, giving the impression of calm authority. Every detail was considered. The shimmer of Meghan's earrings catching the light, the neat fold of Harry's pocket square, the subtle ease of their smiles. They were royalty. They were icons. They were celebrities in their own right. And yet, even with all of that, the moment they took their first steps onto the carpet, the dynamic of the party shifted. You could feel it. Guests who had been laughing moments before froze mid-conversation. Phones subtly angled, not just for a photo, but for documentation, capturing every micro-expression, every flicker of doubt, every forced smile. The whispers began almost immediately, hushed conversations that carried just far enough for others to hear. Are they really here? I didn't expect them to come. Will they be charming? And then there were the stares. Oh, the stares. The kind that make your skin crawl, that pierce through your carefully constructed facade. Some were curious. Others, perhaps, were hostile. And a few were calculating, measuring the couple against an invisible ruler of social currency, deciding, in that fraction of a second, if Harry and Meghan belonged in their world. The Sussexes had walked into a room of equal power, but very different rules. Royal protocol did not translate to Hollywood social dynamics. Charm did not always equal approval. Poise did not guarantee respect. The red carpet itself became a stage. Cameras clicked in sync with the heartbeat of the party. Every step was scrutinized. Every glance captured. Meghan's smile, carefully poised, betrayed just a hint of uncertainty. Harry's posture, commanding as ever, was a shield against the subtle judgment radiating from the crowd. And then, as they neared the entrance, they saw it. A subtle yet unmistakable shift in the crowd. A grouping of A-listers, perfectly polished and perfectly aware of their own power, turned their attention in unison, heads tilting, eyes narrowing slightly. The room had collectively decided that tonight, the Sussexes would be tested. Did they know it yet? Could they sense the undercurrent before the first words were spoken, before the first gasp rippled through the crowd? Perhaps. But anticipation has a way of growing silent before it explodes. The limousine doors opened, and the couple stepped out. Cameras flashed. Meghan's heels clicked against the marble, each sound magnified in the stillness. Harry's hand brushed hers, a small, grounding gesture in a storm of glances and whispers. And then came the first unexpected barrier, the velvet ropes. It's strange to think of velvet ropes as a symbol of tension, but in that moment, they were more than decorative. They were a line drawn between worlds. Guests on one side were relaxed, comfortably ensconced in their social orbit. Guests on the other side, the newcomers, were evaluated before even entering. And as Harry and Meghan approached, the subtle hierarchies of Hollywood revealed themselves. A quick exchange of glances, a barely noticeable smirk, a whispered remark. These were not casual. These were calculated, social maneuvers designed to signal boundaries, assert dominance, or even challenge the authority of the royals. And then came the first challenge. A celebrity, well known for her sharp tongue and fearless reputation, stepped into view. She didn't speak yet. She didn't need to. The look she gave Harry and Meghan was enough. Eyes narrowed slightly, lips pressed into a thin line, a single eyebrow arched ever so slightly. To the untrained observer, it might have seemed like a casual glance. But to those attuned to power dynamics, it was a declaration. a subtle assertion that even royalty could be put in their place. Meghan felt it immediately. Her smile tightened, just barely. Her posture shifted slightly, as if bracing for the unexpected. Harry, ever the protector, adjusted his stance, placing himself subtly between her and the gaze that seemed to pierce deeper than any media headline. And yet, neither moved. Neither faltered. They were accustomed to scrutiny. But this was different. This was live, in-person scrutiny from individuals who thrived on social currency and who had no obligation to defer to tradition or protocol. Hollywood had its own rules, and those rules were being written right now. It's fascinating to observe how a room full of people can shift energy with almost imperceptible cues. Laughter, a pause in conversation, a flick of the hand, the way eyes dart toward or away. These are the instruments of power in elite social settings. The Sussexes, despite their global media experience, were suddenly participants in an entirely new orchestra. They were being evaluated not for charitable work, public appearances, or their royal titles, but for how they measured up against the unspoken standards of Hollywood influence, style, and reputation. And then, as if timed by some invisible conductor, the murmurs began to grow. Whispers, almost imperceptible at first, escalated. Did they really think they could fit in here? I didn't expect them to show. I wonder how long they'll last before someone calls them out. Each phrase, though quietly spoken, carried weight. In a room like this, whispers are louder than shouts. They spread, amplified by curiosity, judgment, and the ever-present desire to witness spectacle. Harry and Meghan moved closer to the entrance, navigating the delicate web of attention and observation. Their every step was watched, every flicker of emotion catalogued. Cameras clicked relentlessly. Meghan's hand brushed a passerby's shoulder politely, eliciting nothing but a polite nod. No warmth, no genuine acknowledgement. Harry offered a slight nod in greeting, eyes scanning for signs of respect or threat. And then it happened. A subtle, almost inaudible laugh, derisive, sharp, cut across the red carpet. Heads turned, some with shock, some with barely concealed amusement. The laugh came from the very celebrity whose gaze had tested them moments before. It was a challenge, a spark thrown into a field already ripe with tension. Meghan's eyes widened slightly. Harry's jaw clenched. The audience felt it, even if the couple tried to mask it. The stage had been set. The first blow had landed. And yet, that was just the beginning. Because the room had changed. What had started as a celebration, a glittering birthday for Hollywood royalty in its own right, had shifted into something far more unpredictable. The dynamics of power, perception, and performance were now fully in play. Harry and Meghan were no longer just guests. They were actors in a drama that had been silently brewing long before their arrival, and every subsequent move would determine how the rest of the evening unfolded. Questions swirled in the air. How would the Sussexes respond to the subtle but unmistakable challenge? Could they maintain their composure under such scrutiny? And most importantly, who would escalate the situation next, the royals or the A-listers? As they crossed the threshold into the mansion itself, the glitz of Hollywood seemed to dim slightly, replaced by the electric anticipation of confrontation. The party had promised glamour, exclusivity, and celebration. What it delivered instead was tension, scrutiny, and the first sparks of public spectacle that would soon ignite into something unforgettable. The evening was no longer just about a birthday. It was about status, reputation, and the invisible rules of power that govern the worlds of fame and influence. And then, just as they reached the grand hall, it happened. A sound, loud, unmistakable, impossible to ignore, echoed across the room. It was the first audible expression of what would come to define the night. Disapproval, ridicule, and challenge. A boo. Not whispered. Not subtle. A boo that cut through the background music, that made conversations pause, that made cameras pivot. The moment was seismic. Harry and Meghan froze. The subtle choreography of calm, collected arrivals replaced by shock. The stage was set, the audience fully engaged, and the night had officially begun. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever felt a look so sharp it slices through every layer of confidence you thought you had? That's exactly what Prince Harry and Meghan Markle experienced the moment they stepped fully into Kris Jenner's grand hall. The first audible boo had reverberated, and the air seemed to thicken with expectation, tension, and unspoken judgment. Guests who had been laughing and mingling just seconds before suddenly turned their attention to the couple. Phones shifted discreetly, ready to capture what was already being whispered would become the defining viral moment of the night. But one gaze, one unflinching stare, was about to alter everything. This wasn't a casual glance. It was a look that communicated history, power, and a subtle yet unmistakable declaration. I see you, and I am not impressed. Meghan noticed it first. She felt a tiny chill creep up her spine despite the warm, chandelier-lit room. Harry, ever vigilant, shifted slightly, instinctively placing himself closer to her. The couple had been scrutinized countless times before: red carpets, royal engagements, Netflix documentaries, but nothing had prepared them for the intensity of this Hollywood inspection. This wasn't the press. This wasn't a scripted interview. This was raw, live, unscripted power dynamics at play. Who could it be? Who had the confidence to silently challenge the Duke and Duchess of Sussex in such a public, high-profile arena? Some guests avoided eye contact, pretending to scroll through phones, yet their attention lingered, drawn magnetically to the tension. The subtle choreography of power in the room had shifted. Suddenly, the couple was no longer just attendees. They were participants in a silent, high-stakes game, a duel of prestige and perception. The A-lister in question moved deliberately through the crowd, eyes fixed on Harry and Meghan with a precision that suggested premeditation. Every movement was calculated. A slight tilt of the head, a measured smile, a pause as if savoring the anticipation. To outsiders, it might have appeared theatrical, but those who understood Hollywood's invisible rules knew better. This was social warfare, and every gesture carried weight. Every micro-expression was a weapon. Meghan's pulse quickened. She scanned the room, looking for allies or at least neutral observers, but found only subtle smirks and half-hidden amusement. Harry's gaze tightened, scanning faces, trying to gauge the mood, trying to calculate how to navigate this invisible minefield without igniting a full-blown confrontation. They had stepped into a world where reputation, influence, and image were everything, and any misstep could be amplified across Instagram, TikTok, and tabloid headlines in seconds. The tension mounted when the A-lister finally spoke, not loud enough for everyone to hear, but just enough that Meghan caught the words. It was a seemingly casual comment, but dripping with condescension and intention. Well, look who decided to show up. The delivery was perfectly timed, just a hint of derision under the polished tone. Laughter rippled quietly among nearby guests, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was the kind of laugh that signaled judgment, exclusion, and power. Harry's jaw tightened. He had weathered royal protocol and public criticism, but this was a different battlefield. Here, centuries of royal training met modern Hollywood's razor-sharp social intelligence. The conflict was silent but electric, a collision of worlds with no referee, no rules, and no warning. Meghan smiled politely, masking the flash of surprise that crossed her face, but inside, she felt the sting of being tested in a way she had not anticipated. The crowd began to sense it too. Subtle shifts in posture, the angle of a phone camera, the quiet murmur of speculation, all indicated that something extraordinary was unfolding. Guests were becoming observers, spectators to a real-time social spectacle that no one had signed up for, but everyone was compelled to watch. The tension was palpable, the kind that makes even the most experienced partygoers hold their breath. And then it escalated. A soft, but deliberate, chuckle echoed from the A-lister. Not loud enough to be overtly confrontational, but enough to be noticed. It was a subtle power play, a reminder to Harry and Meghan that in this arena, status was negotiated, not assumed. Hollywood did not automatically defer to royal titles. Influence had to be earned, recognized, and sometimes even challenged in front of witnesses. Meghan glanced at Harry, silently asking, "Do we engage? Do we retreat?" The decision was almost instinctual. He placed a calming hand over hers, a small gesture of unity and protection, signaling that they would face this moment together. But the pressure was immense. The A-lister's stare had already shifted the room's energy. Eyes that had been neutral now lingered, waiting for a reaction, anticipating drama. What made this encounter even more intense was the subtle network of alliances in the room. Hollywood is a world built on relationships, past favors, and reputations meticulously cultivated over decades. The A-lister's presence wasn't random. Behind the poised exterior and the carefully curated smile lay history, prior encounters, whispered rivalries. Some guests knew of these dynamics. Others sensed them intuitively. The air was electric with anticipation, the kind that precedes either a spectacular display of composure or a complete social collapse. Harry and Meghan had faced scrutiny before, yes, but this was different. This was not a planned press event. There were no cameras they could control, no talking points to deliver. Every movement was spontaneous, yet every movement was immediately observed and judged. Meghan felt the intensity of dozens of unspoken calculations in the room. Who would side with whom? Whose subtle smirk indicated approval or mockery, and whose whispered commentary would eventually make it online. And then, unexpectedly, the A-lister stepped closer. A deliberate pause, a nearly imperceptible shift in stance, as if creating invisible space around them. Meghan's smile wavered. Harry's hand squeezed hers just slightly tighter. Guests nearby instinctively straightened, sensing the gravity of the moment. The silence became heavier, almost audible, like static before a lightning strike. This was not a casual party interaction. This was a carefully orchestrated power test, a social gauntlet, and Harry and Meghan were at the center. Do you ever notice how small gestures can carry enormous weight in elite social environments? A tilt of the head, a subtle smile, a pause before speaking. These become language as precise as words. And in that room, every gesture counted. Every micro-expression was amplified by the eyes of dozens of the world's most influential celebrities. Every move by Harry and Meghan was catalogued, analyzed, and soon to be judged. It was at that precise moment, when all eyes were on them, when the tension felt almost tangible, that the first whisper of public humiliation began to spread. A laugh, soft but deliberate, from a table across the room. A subtle smirk from someone previously engaged in polite conversation. Phones angled, recording, live streaming in ways Harry and Meghan would only learn later. The couple had become unwilling actors in a scene they could neither script nor control. The mini cliffhanger came as the A-lister finally spoke again, louder this time, ensuring that the words would travel through the room without being overtly confrontational but still impossible to ignore. I didn't expect you two to last more than 10 minutes here. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Guests froze, caught between amusement and disbelief. Cameras pivoted subtly, capturing the moment for posterity and social media virality. Harry's protective instincts flared. Meghan's composure was tested like never before. The room had officially transformed from a celebration into a stage of social confrontation. But what came next would escalate far beyond a single look, a whisper, or a chuckle, and it would be seen, heard, and felt by everyone in the mansion. The first audible boos were just the beginning. Have you ever been in a room where a single sound changes everything? Where the energy shifts so dramatically that even the most composed people freeze mid-thought? That's exactly what happened the moment the first audible boo rang out across Kris Jenner's opulent ballroom. Harry and Meghan had already endured dozens of scrutinizing glances, whispered remarks, and calculated stares, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared them for the sound that sliced through the laughter, the music, and the clinking of champagne glasses. The room went from gleaming celebration to a tense, vibrating stage. Guests who had been casually conversing now froze in place, cameras pivoting instinctively toward the source. Even the background music seemed to falter, fading into the background as the collective attention shifted. The boo wasn't subtle. It was deliberate, loud, and unmistakable, a stark punctuation in the middle of what was supposed to be a joyous birthday celebration. Meghan's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, a flicker of vulnerability betraying the composure she had been carefully curating. Harry's jaw tightened, his protective instincts flaring instantly. Where did it come from? No one could have predicted the timing or the audacity. The boo originated from a corner of the room, where one of Hollywood's most notorious personalities sat, a figure known for their sharp wit, fearlessness, and ability to command attention without uttering a word. This was someone who didn't just speak, they dominated every room they entered. And their target was clear, the Sussexes. The boo was more than a sound. It was a statement, a calculated act of social disruption designed to unsettle, humiliate, and remind the couple, and everyone else in the room, that status in Hollywood is never automatic. The reactions were immediate. Some guests gasped audibly, startled by the breach of etiquette. Others suppressed laughter, barely concealing their amusement at the audacity of the act. A few whispered to each other, the words traveling through the crowd like wildfire. Did that just happen? I didn't think anyone would dare. They're royals, but does it even matter here? The tension was thick, almost tangible, as cameras continued to pivot and capture every micro-expression. Every eye in the room was suddenly on the Sussexes, the spotlight no longer gentle but piercing. Meghan's reaction was subtle yet telling. Her eyes flicked toward the source of the boo, scanning faces, searching for confirmation of intent. The humorless smirk of the instigator was unmistakable. This was deliberate, personal, and unmistakably public. Harry, maintaining his calm but alert demeanor, adjusted his stance, a subtle yet unmistakable shield between Meghan and the escalating scrutiny. He knew that the eyes in the room weren't just observing. They were judging, weighing every reaction, every facial twitch, and every pause against invisible social rules that could determine who belonged in this world and who did not. This was more than embarrassment. It was a test. And in Hollywood, tests like these are rarely spontaneous. They're strategic. The crowd, already primed by whispers and curiosity, began to feed off the tension. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Phones were angled to capture what could only be described as a rare spectacle, the collision of royalty with Hollywood audacity. Every guest became a silent participant, witnessing what would later be analyzed, replayed, and dissected across social media, tabloids, and online gossip columns. The first boo acted as a catalyst, igniting reactions that ranged from subtle amusement to outright shock. Some guests leaned in, eager to see how the royals would respond. Others exchanged glances, trying to predict whether Harry and Meghan would remain composed or crack under pressure. The dynamics in the room shifted dramatically. Suddenly, social alliances became visible, as groups of guests subtly positioned themselves closer or further away from the unfolding drama. Whispered commentary traveled in waves, like the invisible pulse of gossip spreading through the crowd. And then it escalated further. The initial boo, a single vocal jab, emboldened others. A smattering of laughter followed, sharp and controlled, punctuating the moment with clear disapproval. A few more guests muttered under their breath, words not meant for the public but easily heard by those nearby. Really? They think they belong here. The room's energy had shifted. What was meant to be a celebration of Kris Jenner's milestone birthday had transformed into a crucible of power, perception, and social judgment. Harry's eyes scanned the crowd, calculating. He understood immediately that any reaction, verbal, physical, or otherwise, would be magnified, analyzed, and possibly weaponized. Meghan's composure, tested by a lifetime of media attention, was now challenged in a different arena entirely, a room of peers who owed her no deference. Her royal title, her global influence, her experience in diplomacy, all of it was suddenly irrelevant in a social ecosystem governed by subtle aggression, influence, and reputation. The Sussexes' internal dialogue must have been intense. Meghan likely questioned whether to respond directly, to engage, or to maintain the stoic poise she had perfected over years in the public eye. Harry, protective yet strategic, weighed the consequences of any immediate response. They were caught in a social gauntlet, where every micro-expression, every breath, every slight nod carried consequences. The first boo was more than a sound. It was the ignition of a sequence that would test their emotional resilience, their public image, and their ability to navigate a world where power is fluid and merciless. What makes this moment particularly fascinating is the way it juxtaposed Hollywood bravado against royal composure. Meghan and Harry had faced public scrutiny countless times, yet the dynamics here were different. In royal engagements, criticism is often filtered, staged, or mediated by protocol. Here, there were no filters, no handlers, no script. Every action, every reaction, was immediately observed, interpreted, and judged by a room full of peers who understood influence, image, and optics better than any publicist could explain. And then came the subtle escalation. The laughter that followed, faint but deliberate, more than one person joining in with a knowing smirk. The Sussexes had become the centerpiece of a live social experiment, their every reaction recorded, dissected, and destined to become viral content within hours. Phones discreetly angled, live social media updates posting in real time, whispers translating to Instagram captions and TikTok commentary. The initial boo was just the overture. The real spectacle was unfolding. Meghan's eyes darted briefly toward Harry, a silent plea for composure. Harry's hand brushed hers subtly, grounding, reassuring, signaling unity and determination. Their shared gaze communicated a recognition of the stakes. The night was no longer about celebration. It was about survival, perception, and emotional resilience. The audience, sensing the tension, leaned in collectively, anticipating drama, scandal, or a breakdown. The Sussexes were now both actors and audience in a scene they had not scripted, a play unfolding in real time under the gaze of cameras, gossip, and global attention. The first audible boo had done more than disrupt a birthday party. It had set the stage for a series of escalating confrontations that would challenge the Sussexes in ways that no media training, royal etiquette, or Hollywood experience could fully prepare them for. It was a warning, a declaration, and a catalyst all at once. The subtle whispers of disbelief and amusement began to swell into louder murmurs. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Cameras pivoted to capture every movement. Social media feeds, almost immediately, began lighting up with speculation, reactions, and memes. And then, just as Harry and Meghan took their first steps further into the room, the A-lister who had been observing them so intently made a move. A slight shift in stance, a deliberate turn of the head, a smirk that didn't quite reach their eyes. The crowd responded almost instinctively, leaning forward, waiting for the next act of spectacle. Every gaze, every whisper, every flash of a camera now focused squarely on the couple. The first boo had announced the battle. The next moment would ignite it. But what came next would escalate far beyond the first sound, far beyond whispers and smirks, and would leave everyone in the room, celebrities, staff, and royals alike, completely stunned. Have you ever been caught in a moment where everything you've ever learned about grace, poise, and composure is tested to its absolute limit? That's exactly the crucible Meghan Markle faced at Kris Jenner's 70th birthday party. The first boo had rung out. Whispers and laughter had spread like wildfire. Cameras swiveled, capturing every heartbeat, every micro-expression, and all eyes were now on her. Would she crumble under the scrutiny, or would she prove, once again, that her poise could survive even the most calculated attacks? The room was a sea of eyes, glancing, measuring, analyzing. Some were curious. Some were amused. Others were openly judgmental, calculating the social currency of every reaction. Meghan's hand tightened slightly on Harry's, a quiet gesture of solidarity in the midst of chaos. She knew this moment would be dissected, not just by the guests in the room, but by millions across social media and news platforms worldwide. One wrong move could ignite headlines, memes, and endless speculation. One misstep could become a viral humiliation. For a brief second, Meghan's carefully constructed facade wavered. The smile she offered was polite, but the slight widening of her eyes betrayed a flash of shock. She scanned the crowd, searching for allies, at least neutral faces, but found mostly smirks, sidelong glances, and a few barely concealed chuckles. Harry, sensing the tension, subtly positioned himself slightly ahead of her, a shield in body language, if not in space. The couple had walked into a room where social hierarchies were constantly enforced, and tonight, those hierarchies had been challenged in the boldest way possible, a loud, deliberate public jab. Meghan had faced media scrutiny before. She had been the subject of relentless criticism, dissected in tabloids, and attacked on social media. But this was different. This wasn't filtered through headlines or a controlled press event. This was live, immediate, and merciless. She could feel the eyes piercing her from every direction, measuring her every reaction. The subtle cues, the half-smiles, the tilted heads, the deliberate pauses, were all designed to unsettle. Hollywood was playing by its own rules, and Meghan was being tested in a game she hadn't fully anticipated. Her mind raced. Should she respond verbally? A polite acknowledgement, perhaps? A sharp retort? Or maintain silence, relying on poise as her defense? The instincts honed from years of public appearances and royal protocol collided with the unpredictability of this environment. Every second counted. Every gesture, every blink, every micro-expression could be captured, interpreted, and weaponized. It was a delicate calculus, and one misstep could define the night. Meghan chose subtlety. She smiled, a controlled, elegant smile that masked her inner awareness. Her eyes, however, betrayed something more. They flicked toward the source of the tension, the A-lister whose gaze had initiated this social ambush. The look was measured, deliberate, signaling that she was aware, that she was not intimidated, but also that she understood the stakes. It was a balancing act, strength tempered with diplomacy, defiance softened by grace. Harry, watching her, felt a mixture of pride and tension. He knew the pressures of public scrutiny intimately, but even he was struck by the intensity of the moment. His gaze scanned the room, noting the reactions of other guests, assessing who might escalate the situation, who might intervene, and who was simply observing with morbid fascination. He whispered something quietly to Meghan, a subtle grounding gesture, reminding her, and himself, that they were in this together. The room reacted almost instantly to Meghan's controlled composure. Some guests relaxed slightly, recognizing the resilience she displayed. Others, however, seemed frustrated by her poise, as if the lack of a dramatic reaction defied their expectations. It's fascinating how, in environments like this, reactions themselves become performative. A composed response can sometimes incite more tension than a visible emotional outburst. And Meghan, in that moment, was mastering that delicate dance. Yet the emotional stakes remained high. Meghan could feel the subtle energy shifting, the room leaning in collectively, anticipating what would come next. Would she crack? Would she retaliate? Would Harry intervene? The uncertainty amplified the tension, making each breath and each step heavier than it would have been in an ordinary setting. Every guest in the room, from seasoned celebrities to junior influencers, was now invested in her reaction, conscious that this moment could be dissected and replayed across multiple platforms. And then came the unexpected. A whisper, followed by a ripple of laughter, louder this time. Someone from a nearby table, emboldened by the initial boo, had joined in. The dynamic had escalated from subtle judgment to collective social pressure. Meghan's smile remained, though slightly tighter now. She took a small, deliberate step closer to Harry, as if to silently convey that they were united in facing the scrutiny. The gesture was subtle but powerful, a physical acknowledgement that they would weather this storm together. The crowd's energy was now a mix of anticipation, amusement, and judgment. Cameras pivoted to catch every angle. Phones were discreetly raised, live feeds capturing the unfolding drama for audiences beyond the mansion walls. Meghan's training in diplomacy, media management, and royal composure collided with the immediacy of Hollywood's unpredictability. Every movement was critical. Every glance could be read as a sign of weakness or defiance. The psychological weight of the moment intensified when Meghan realized that this wasn't merely about social snubs or celebrity ego. This was a challenge, a test of her social acumen in an environment where authority and influence are fluid and constantly negotiated. One misstep could ripple across her carefully cultivated image, impacting relationships, alliances, and public perception. The room had become a live laboratory, observing her responses, measuring her resilience, and waiting for the inevitable crack. But Meghan did not crack. She breathed, recalibrated, and projected calm poise, demonstrating a mastery of emotional control under extreme social pressure. Her eyes, steady now, scanned the room, connecting subtly with allies and neutral observers, signaling that she was present, aware, and not intimidated. This silent assertion of confidence subtly shifted the dynamics, reminding the room that while status in Hollywood is earned, experience in public scrutiny is formidable. Yet the moment was far from resolved. The A-lister, whose gaze had catalyzed the tension, was still observing, still calculating, still poised for the next act. Guests remained on edge, anticipating escalation. The first boo had been the overture. Meghan's composed response was the counterpoint. And the audience, both in the room and across social media feeds, awaited the next crescendo. And then, Just when the tension seemed to stabilize, it happened. A movement, a whisper, a subtle smirk, an almost imperceptible gesture that sent a fresh ripple through the crowd. Harry's protective stance shifted. Meghan's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing the intent. The balance of power in the room was still in flux, and the night's drama was far from over. What came next would push the couple further, testing not just their composure, but their ability to navigate an environment where every gesture, every expression, and every word could become a viral sensation. The stakes were higher than ever. The drama was just beginning. Have you ever heard words delivered so casually, yet so cutting that they leave the air in a room frozen? That's exactly what happened at Kris Jenner's 70th birthday party when the A-lister who had been observing Harry and Meghan decided to speak. Up until this point, the tension had been simmering, crackling in the background like static before a storm. The first boo, the subtle smirks, the whispers, they were all precursors. And now, words pierced through the glittering ambience, precise and surgical in their impact. The crowd leaned in instinctively, sensing the pivotal moment. Phones angled subtly, cameras pivoted, and even the guests who had been maintaining polite conversations found themselves drawn to the unfolding drama. This wasn't just social discomfort. This was a high-stakes confrontation. Meghan's eyes flickered briefly toward Harry, her lips pressed into a composed line. Harry, scanning the room, could feel the weight of every gaze, every silent judgment. Every smile she had practiced, every gesture honed through years of public appearances, was now a tool. She chose subtlety, a graceful laugh, controlled and deliberate, followed by a slight nod. The acknowledgement was measured, signaling that she had heard the words, understood the intention, but was not deterred. It was an assertion of strength wrapped in diplomacy, a declaration that while the attack had landed, she was not defined by it. Harry, meanwhile, was acutely aware of the optics. He had spent his life balancing the scrutiny of the public, the media, and the monarchy. This situation was a different battlefield entirely. No protocol, no pre-planned statements, no royal handlers to buffer the impact. Every action, every glance, every micro-expression mattered. He subtly positioned himself closer to Meghan, a protective gesture that also served as a visual statement. Unity in the face of scrutiny. The message was clear. Together, they would withstand this storm. The room's reaction was instantaneous. Some guests whispered in astonishment, impressed by Meghan's composure. Others suppressed laughter, recognizing the subtle power play at work. A few exchanged glances, calculating how this confrontation would play out, who would align with whom, and how it might affect their own standing. Cameras clicked, capturing not just images but the palpable tension that had enveloped the room. Every eye was focused, every mind analyzing the unfolding social chess game. What made the words sting even more was their context. The comment had not come in isolation. It was preceded by the initial boo, by stares, smirks, and subtle gestures that had collectively undermined the couple's perceived status. The A-lister's remark was the crescendo of these early provocations, designed to test the couple's reaction publicly. It was a reminder that in Hollywood, influence is fluid, power is performative, and social dominance is constantly reinforced. Meghan's response, or lack thereof, was itself a statement. By maintaining poise, by controlling her expression, by engaging subtly with Harry, she diffused some of the intended humiliation while signaling resilience. But the impact on the room was complex. Guests observed not just the words themselves, but the reactions. Every twitch, every glance, every controlled smile became part of the narrative. The A-lister had ignited a spectacle, but Meghan and Harry's controlled response ensured that the drama was far from one-sided. And yet, the tension did not dissipate. Instead, it shifted, evolving from an initial jab to a charged atmosphere, ripe for escalation. The A-lister's words had been carefully measured, but their ripple effect was unpredictable. Some guests were emboldened to whisper their own commentary. Others leaned forward, cameras angled to catch micro-expressions, and a few simply watched in awe, captivated by the drama unfolding live before them. Harry, sensing the need to maintain control, subtly guided Meghan toward the next segment of the room, using body language to communicate strategy. This small movement, invisible to most, was a silent negotiation with the dynamics of power, a way to reclaim narrative, assert control, and navigate a minefield without igniting further conflict. Meghan's awareness, her composure, her subtle cues in response to the provocation demonstrated her understanding of this delicate balance. The A-lister, noticing the controlled responses, paused momentarily. The tension hung in the air, almost visible, a taut string ready to snap. The room collectively inhaled, waiting for the next interaction, the next spark. Social games of this magnitude are rarely predictable. Every action has consequences. Every expression carries weight. And the Sussexes, despite their public experience, were now playing by rules they could neither fully control nor entirely anticipate. It was in this charged moment that the first signs of escalation appeared. Laughter, faint but deliberate, emanated from the corners of the room. A few whispers began to circulate, phrases that would later surface in social media posts and news coverage. Did you hear what was said? She's holding it together surprisingly well. I wonder if he's going to respond. The dynamics of observation, anticipation, and judgment were in full swing, amplifying the impact of the A-lister's words far beyond the initial delivery. And then, just when the tension seemed at its peak, the A-lister leaned in slightly, lowering their voice just enough for Meghan and Harry to hear clearly, a final jab that ensured no ambiguity. I guess not everyone can walk in here and own it. The words were carefully chosen, casual, condescending, public, yet delivered with enough subtlety to suggest charm to those not paying close attention. Meghan's composure remained intact, but the room shifted perceptibly, as though holding its collective breath, waiting for a reaction that could define the night. But what came next would escalate even further, turning a tense exchange into a spectacle no one in that room, or watching from the outside, would soon forget. Have you ever been in a situation where the energy of a room completely flips, transforming polite social interaction into collective spectacle? That's exactly what happened the moment the A-lister's cutting words settled into the air at Kris Jenner's birthday party. The initial boo, the whispered remarks, and now the pointed verbal jab had created a pressure cooker of tension. Suddenly, it wasn't just about Harry and Meghan. The entire room became an actor, reacting, participating, and amplifying the drama in ways even the couple couldn't anticipate. Immediately, subtle murmurs began spreading like a ripple through the room. Conversations halted mid-sentence, phones angled discreetly, and cameras pivoted toward the Sussexes. Guests whispered to each other, their words mixing curiosity, disbelief, and amusement. Did you hear that? I can't believe they said that. She's holding it together, barely. Even the staff, trained to blend into the background, could not escape the spectacle unfolding in real time. The atmosphere had shifted from celebration to charged anticipation. Every guest, knowingly or unknowingly, was complicit in the collective judgment. The room's reaction escalated almost instantaneously. A few guests, emboldened by the initial boo and the A-lister's words, began laughing quietly, a soft, mocking chorus. Others exchanged glances that carried unspoken messages, alliances subtly forming, social hierarchies reinforced. Some were clearly amused by the audacity of the confrontation, while others seemed incredulous that members of the royal family, symbols of centuries-old protocol and dignity, could be publicly challenged in such a modern, unapologetic social arena. Meghan, sensing the rising tension, subtly adjusted her posture. Her smile remained controlled, though her eyes flicked toward Harry, silently seeking guidance. Harry's protective instincts kicked in, and his stance shifted slightly to shield her from the most direct lines of sight. He could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on them, each evaluating, measuring, and anticipating the couple's next move. The room was no longer a celebration. It was a crucible, testing the Sussexes' resilience, composure, and social acumen. And then, the whispers became louder. Small clusters of guests began commenting in audible tones, though still under polite guise, their words clearly intended to be overheard by the Sussexes. Do you think they expected this? They look uncomfortable. I wonder how long they'll keep it together. The murmurs were contagious. Guests who had been on the periphery now leaned forward, their attention fully captivated. Phones discreetly angled, capturing every micro-expression, while live streams and social media updates ensured that the spectacle would soon be viral. The initial boo had ignited a chain reaction, and the A-listers' words fanned the flames. But it wasn't just whispers. A few individuals, more audacious, allowed subtle chuckles or soft laughs to escape. Not raucous, but enough to punctuate the tension. The sound reverberated through the room, setting off small waves of energy, as if confirming a shared understanding. The royals were now on display in a way that defied expectation. Cameras pivoted instinctively, capturing the expressions of Meghan and Harry as well as the reactions of the crowd. Every detail, the tightening of Meghan's lips, the faint furrow in Harry's brow, the tilt of a guest's head, was now magnified in a living tableau of social power. Some guests tried to maintain composure, nodding politely, but even their subtle reactions added to the spectacle. A raised eyebrow, a half-smile, a quiet whisper. These were not neutral gestures. They were micro-commentaries, social punctuation marks signaling judgment, curiosity, or amusement. The Sussexes were no longer simply participants in a party. They had become the focus of a live performance, an unfolding drama measured not by etiquette, but by perception, influence, and spectacle. The subtle chaos was almost palpable. Waiters, moving through the room with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres, tread lightly, aware of the tension but unable to intervene. Even Kris Jenner, the host herself, was acutely aware that the dynamics had shifted. Her carefully orchestrated birthday party, meant to celebrate decades of influence and fame, had transformed into a high-stakes arena where the royals were being tested under unfiltered scrutiny. And then, the first signs of audible laughter began to ripple outward, low and controlled at first, then louder as a few bold guests joined in. The room collectively leaned into the energy, anticipation building like a wave ready to crash. Harry's jaw clenched slightly, Meghan's eyes narrowed briefly. The couple exchanged a subtle glance, a silent communication of strategy. Maintain composure, assess the environment, and prepare for whatever came next. Social dynamics in Hollywood operate on subtle power plays, and tonight, the rules were clear. The initial boo and the A-listers' words were not isolated incidents. They were provocations, designed to observe, test, and unsettle. Guest reactions, whether whispers, laughter, or smirks, were part of the performance, a way to reinforce social hierarchies and measure influence. Harry and Meghan, despite their experience, were now participants in a game they could neither script nor fully anticipate. Some whispers escalated into outright commentary. "She's handling it better than I expected," one guest murmured to another. "But you can see the tension in him," came the reply. Cameras pivoted to catch these interactions, capturing the reactions of onlookers, ensuring that the drama extended beyond the central figures. Social media, fueled by live feeds and insiders, would soon amplify these moments exponentially. What had begun as a private insult had quickly snowballed into a global spectacle, with each guest's reaction becoming part of the narrative. Meghan, aware of the optics, subtly repositioned herself closer to Harry. Her body language projected calm, yet the controlled tension in her eyes hinted at her awareness of the stakes. Harry, in turn, subtly adjusted his stance, a physical shield but also a signal of unity. They were navigating not just the insult but the collective reactions, balancing strategy, composure, and emotional resilience. Every step they took, every gesture they made, was now a public statement. And yet, the crowd continued to escalate the tension. Laughter, whispers, and subtle smirks became louder, more coordinated, as if some guests were daring the couple to respond, to falter, or to retaliate. The Sussexes were fully aware that any reaction, verbal or nonverbal, would be amplified, dissected, and possibly weaponized in real time. The pressure was immense, the stakes higher than anyone outside the room could comprehend. Suddenly, the energy reached a tipping point. A few guests, emboldened by the A-listers' boldness and the initial reactions, began to mock subtly. Low chuckles, pointed glances, small gestures meant to intimidate or undermine. The room collectively braced for what would happen next, watching, waiting. Cameras pivoted to capture micro-expressions, phones angled for live coverage, and whispers swirled through the crowd. The Sussexes were no longer merely guests. They were the epicenter of a social storm, with every attendee now participating, consciously or unconsciously, in the unfolding spectacle. And then, just as Harry and Meghan began to maneuver toward another section of the room, a loud, deliberate laugh rang out, a signal that the collective tension had reached a critical mass. The room's focus intensified. The Sussexes were caught in a live experiment, observed, evaluated, and anticipated in real time. Every micro-expression mattered. Every small gesture carried weight. Every blink, every tilt of the head, every subtle adjustment in posture was noted, recorded, and processed by dozens of people whose social influence could amplify or distort the narrative. But what came next would go beyond whispers, smirks, and laughs. The initial chaos was only the beginning, a prelude to the dramatic escalation that would shock everyone in the room and reverberate far beyond the mansion walls.